Hey folks, in this interview, I'm sitting down with Asher Svidensky. We're going to be talking about storytelling in photography. This is TWiP. Hey folks, welcome back to another This Week in Photo interview. I'm here with Asher Svidensky. I'm trying to make sure I get that last name right. Asher,
don't worry about it.
I just butchered it. Asher is amazing. We have a ton of stuff to talk about, but in particular, Asher is what I call one of those traveling photographers that is. He's probably gone more than he's home. In fact, he'll tell you that he doesn't really have a home. So we're going to talk about his globe-trotting adventures, but moreover, we're going to talk about the idea of bringing storytelling back into photography versus the geartography and, you know, being consumed by specs and lenses and all this stuff. How do you tell real stories today in the cloud of all this technology that's going on? So Asher, welcome to the show, man. How's it going?
Welcome to the show. Oh, I can't believe it. As soon as we started, the sun came out. I look like I'm in a horror movie, right?
No, you don't. It looks like you did some creative lighting there. I see.
Exactly.
It's going to slowly move off of you.
Exactly what I did.
No, it looks good.
I timed this interview exactly so the sun would go between the two buildings in front of me.
You are the master of light. You are the master of light, man. So tell us about, before we dive in, man, before we dive in, tell me, or tell us, just give us your elevator pitch. Like, who is Asher? What are you, like when you're at a cocktail party and people ask you, hey, what do you do? What do you tell them? What's the Asher story?
First of all, don't say anything. I'm too surprised to be in a cocktail party. This is my
like, how'd you let me in here?
Well, my honest pitch would always be I make bad decisions and waste my money. But overall, what I do is I do a mixture of documentary photography, art photography, and I'm really passionate and in love with mixing them with storytelling. So basically doing photography projects, photography essays, which are basically the same thing in my opinion, but have some different attributes to them. And I try to use my photography for storytelling, basically. And that's pretty much what I do. And so far, I haven't been killed. So
yeah. Well, I want to talk about that. Like I said, I sort of teased that in the intro. You are out there. You're the way I was saying before we started recording. You are in service of the story versus in service of using the next and latest gear to try to eke some new thing out of it. How did you get to that level? Like, how do photographers today, in your opinion, break out of the, you know, I need the latest and greatest Nikon, Sony, Canon, Panasonic, Fuji camera and move into where I think your brain is, and it's more of, I can't even remember what kind of camera am I shooting, but that next shot is what's keeping me up at night. How do you go from A to B?
Well, it's funny because it's an A and B process, right? So the first part of it is, well, I can't afford anything else. So I guess I have to stick to that.
There you go.
And then after I started doing what I do today, which was kind of a weird path of doing what I do today, because I started with doing fashion and PR photography and even wedding photography, which was a horrible part of my life. Wow. Which I'm trying to repress right now.
Dude, you are one of the coolest people I know. I can't see you shooting weddings. How does that even happen?
I did too.
Not that it's not cool to shoot weddings, but you just don't strike me as the consummate wedding photographer with the black suit on, you know, taking photos at the wedding.
Let me be the person to say that. It's not cool to shoot weddings. It's horrible. No, I did too. And then at the end, at the beginning of the second one, I was like, I'm done. Yeah. No more. And then I remember the first camera I bought, it was way too expensive and way too professional for my level. But I wanted to start with the best I could get. And try to live up to that level. And then as time passed, I just couldn't afford anything else. And when I started doing documentary photography and travel photography, I always had this struggle of, man, I really wish I could buy this camera because, you know, mine is old and crappy and, you know, doesn't work as well as the new one. But with that same amount of money, I can just go to Indonesia for another month and a half. Right. And that kind of economical game of saying, okay, do I spend $5,000 now on the new camera that just came out? Or do I use that money to buy another flight ticket, have a personal guide for 30 days, a car, and maybe not living in a guest house? And I think for me over time, that kind of became the mathematic. Yeah. And every time I do a gig or an assignment, or I do sell a project, or I do like a really cool workshop, I have that possibility I have that choice every time, saying, okay, do I use this money I made to promote my projects and my hopes for the future, or do I use that money to buy a new camera, which will help me in the future, but what's the most important thing right now to do? And for the longest time, I always pick the projects, and I still do. I had to buy a new camera about 3 months ago just because my old one died. So I had my old one for about 7 years or 8 years. I still use it. It's just that it has so many malfunctions on the job, and I cannot take the risk of, going to this, like really remote place, which is really hard to get to, and building the relationship and everything, and then have error number 54 on the back of my camera and be like,
yeah.
That's the only reason I end up dealing with it this year.
But what do you say to the guys and the women that are like let's say in corporate America or corporate wherever, right? And they're like, you know what, one day I want to be like Asher, one day I'll travel, but until then, let me go buy this brand new Fuji because maybe that will inspire me to go travel. And then they get caught on that conveyor belt of, you know what, if I had that camera that that so and so shoots with, for sure I'll book that trip to Vietnam or something like that. How do you get them from the analysis paralysis stage and into the actual I'm in the middle of nowhere having fun taking pictures of things I've never seen before?
Well, I'll try to give the nicest possible answer to that, to be honest. And I say the nicest because I grew up in a more Russian-oriented culture and family. So for us, being nice or being considerate is not really a part of life advice, right? The most common comment I got from my dad was, "You're an idiot." So,
but he loved you, though, right?
He really did. Yeah. So I would say that there's two variables to this situation. One is, obviously you need to have a camera. You need to have something you can work with, and it can't be something that doesn't make the cut, right? So in a sense, if your camera is a really, really bad, out of focus, blurry images, artistic camera, then you might have struggled if you want to actually go to this as a business, if you actually want to go and make a living doing this kind of travel photography, storytelling photography. But with that being said, the minimum requirements for a camera to be sufficient to publish in magazines or online is so low right now that you could pretty much work with your iPhone to do these things. And I'm not joking. It's something everybody says, oh, you can just take a photo with the iPhone, or the Afghan girl, which is one of the most famous photos ever taken, was taken with a camera worse than your iPhone. Wow. I agree with that, but it's not necessarily mean it's enough, and obviously over time you'll grow. But I think that if you're sitting at home and you're contemplating, should I book this trip? Should I not book this trip? Maybe I'm not ready yet. Maybe I need to get a better camera. Maybe I need to take another workshop. Maybe I need to practice my photography skill, whatever. Then maybe this occupation is not for you, because most people who do this, they just get up and do it. I mean, for me, when I go and do these projects, I always take the risk that it's going to fail. And most of the time I'm not prepared and I'm not ready. And I know that no matter how much research I'll do, I'll never be, okay, I know what I'm going to do, but I'm willing to take the risk. So my point will always be, if it's something you're interested in, do it. And if you think you can do it, but if you think that you can do it, then go ahead and prove it, right? Don't sit at home and think, in a bit I'll be ready, because you're never ready. You'll never be ready for what's out there.
But if you
are, then it's no reason going there.
If you've made that jump, let's fast forward and say, okay, they listen to it and they're like, you know what, he's right. I'm going to go book my ticket right now. They book a ticket to some exotic place they've never been before. Then what? Like we started this interview off, you are driven by story and storytelling versus, hey, pretty picture and composition. And hey, you're telling a story, and the images, like we talked about in the pre-interview, you said the images that you shoot aren't necessarily perfect all the time, but they're in context, they're in service of an overall story. How do people get to that level where they're thinking from a storytelling standpoint versus a f-stop, shutter speed, composition, rule of third, all that stuff?
Well, it's hard to answer that for a couple of reasons. One is it's not a jump. It's not the next step from photography. I mean, for me, first time I started my career, I basically sold everything I had. I was really depressed of the way my life was going in Israel. I did fashion shoots, like I said, wedding photography a little bit, product photography, and I hated it. And like almost overnight, I said like, enough is enough. I sold everything I had and I bought a one-way ticket to Asia. And my idea was to just try, right? Do travel photography for a bit. And at first I was exactly like you said. I was like, okay, I'm just going to make pretty images wherever I go. And then maybe hopefully that will kickstart my career. And my plan was to travel about a year and a half. And I think the first 2 months of traveling, I did exactly what you said. I just took pretty photos and portraits of whoever I met. And I thought this would be sufficient. And then at a certain point, as I was traveling, I just found it to be very empty, and that was derivative from my own personal experiences. Right, I grew up with stories all of my life, and that's the only reason I decided traveling was because of the stories I heard. So, as I started working and as I started reviewing my own work and just experimenting with doing this actual kind of work, I realized, wait, this is not enough for me. And then the last 2 months that I traveled, I ended up doing my first photography project. And if anybody reads it or sees it, it's very spontaneous. None of it was pre-calculated. I didn't set up to do a project. I set up to be 1 week in West Mongolia to photograph eagle hunters and move on. I ended up staying for about 2 months, photographing a huge amount of families, experimenting, and then figuring out, okay, maybe I want to tell a story about the future generation of eagle hunters, and maybe I want to photograph this kid, or maybe this kid is not good enough for a story. And then over time, I kind of developed that muscle. And to answer your question more precisely, is that it's not a jump. It's not the next step from taking pretty images. The next one is telling stories. It's more like a crossroads where you need to choose which direction you want to take. Because I know amazing photographers who don't do storytelling, but their images and work tells volumes. And the main difference is that the kind of work they do comes from their own life perspective and their own life experience. And just one last thing to finish that answer, it is scary. And it's by far nothing that somebody can, just go 1, 2, 3, you got it. I mean, first night I left Israel and I went for my year and a half of traveling. I was in Mongolia. I was really unprepared. I was really, really scared. I remember crying at first night. I was like, oh my God, what have I done? But I was practically scared.
Wow.
I think only after I landed and I checked into this really small guest house in city center, and you land into -20, and I came at winter because I didn't know any better. And I was sitting there just saying, what have I done? This is really different than what I was expecting it to be, or what I expected traveling to be based on what I've seen.
Yeah, out of your comfort zone, right?
And from that low, I always went up. And the reason I went up is because I knew I couldn't give up. I knew I couldn't turn around and go back. So I just went, okay, the next day, let's give it a shot. Let's just walk around. The next day, all right, let's go to this place. I heard about it. Could be cool. The next day, maybe I should drive to the countryside. Or the next day, I can fly to this place, which is really cool. And like a snowball, basically, it started from being something very scary and out of my element to a point where it grew to, just go to a place and you figure it out.
Did that feeling, did that breakthrough come from, sort of like, well, I'm here now, I better figure it out, or was there just like, was it the adventure inside of you? It was like, okay, let's just go out and see because I may never make it back to this place again. Let me go look. What's the thing that got you out of that little guest house and out sort of exploring the place?
Well, for me, it was, I don't know, if we talked before about my dad, it was just the attitude that I was always taught to have in terms of, if you do something, do it all the way. There is no half-assing anything. So I was like, okay, that's a decision I made. I want to do travel photography. I want to make this one a lifetime journey. Just do it. Whatever happens, happens. And and until today, every time I get this situation of this might be risky, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I signed in for. Let's go. And sometimes it's really, really funny, and sometimes it's just really, really bad.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I said before to just go ahead and do it. That's exactly the point. It's not that, just go ahead and dare and it'll be fine. It's people who end up doing it are people who can't not do it.
Yeah.
And again, the whole point, people say, like, okay, maybe I can. It's like, oh, go prove me wrong.
Yeah.
That's exactly the point. So I was dead terrified. I always am, even today when I work. It's just that I'm very proud to be able to make the decision of keep going at it.
Yeah.
Just give that another try. Just do it again.
And you know what, you and I before a couple of days ago, we were talking about the idea of how, you know, some people travel a lot, but that travel isn't necessarily travel because they may go spend, you know, 2, 7, maybe even 2 weeks in one location. But you spend extended periods in a location to really sort of get yourself ingrained and embedded and really understanding of the culture that you're in. How does that happen? Like, how do you from a, you know, asking from a selfish standpoint, if I wanted to do that, I wanted to go to, you know, one of the countries that you visited, and I want to not be disruptive, but also want to take great photos and also want to learn the culture and see what's going on there. Well, what's the best way to approach that without seeming like the ignorant tourist, you know?
Well, you're always the ignorant tourist, right? Yeah. That's the situation.
Oh, you know me. How do you know?
You know I know. No, I know myself. That's how I feel every time I go to a place. I mean, yeah, we talked about it, and I think it's a mixture of thinking methods, right? So the first thinking method you always need to adapt when you travel, if you really want to get a sense of place or you really want to dive in, is never have the attitude of, I might never come back. Mm-hmm. Right? Wherever I travel, my mindset is always like, yeah, I'll come back here again. I mean, even if I don't like it, I don't want, but there's no reason why I shouldn't fly back here out of work. Mm-hmm. Which is really expensive, and a lot of time it doesn't happen. But that attitude, that mindset of, you know, it's okay if I don't see everything. It's okay if I give certain things go and I focus on what is important for me, is really helpful in diving into something. And in terms of being in a place, I think we talked about this where, you know, there's so many photographers where they've been to 70 different countries in the past 10 years or so on.
Yeah.
And for me, for example, I do travel photography a lot. And I think in the past 10 years of work, I've been to maybe 7 or 8 different countries. That's it. And, you know, every year, certain countries I come back to every year. For example, Mongolia, I'm going 2-3 times a year, sometimes for work, sometimes for fun. And I still don't know it. There's still so much to explore. There's still so much culture to get used to and to figure it out. And I think it's the difference between diversity and depth understanding. So take a comparison on your experience. I mean, think about somebody who says, okay, I want to go to the States, so I'm going to be one day in New York, and then saying, oh, I know New York, I've been there one day.
Right.
That'd be funny, wouldn't
it? Yeah.
On the other hand, you can have somebody who say, you know, I lived in New York for 3 years. If he says that he really knows New York, that's still kind of funny. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying it's demeaning his experience, but there's so much to learn about certain places, especially cultural places or places who are somewhat ancient, right, or somewhat rich in culture. It's an endless pit. You can always study more and more and more. This is why I personally have so much appreciation for photographers who end up working in one place their entire career.
Yeah.
Right? There's so many photographers like Ekaterina Basso, for example, who only worked in Paris. Mm-hmm. I mean, his knowledge of Paris is not up to maximum, doesn't know everything about Paris, but he knows so much that his stories, his experiences of the place are amazing and of huge value for everybody who sees it.
Yeah.
So I think when you do travel, any kind of travel, doesn't have to be a photography one, you always have this choice of saying, do I want to know this place in depth, or do I want to have a checklist? And having a checklist is also fine. It just depends on what do you want to get out of this experience.
Yeah, do you want to just mark it off of your list? But then, if not everyone can do that, obviously, right? Not everyone can get embedded and marinated in a culture for a long period of time. But if you're not, what are the best ways to approach it if you can? Like if you can go, you know, like say Vietnam or Bali or Thailand or something, and spend a good solid 2 to 3 weeks there. What's the best way? Is it you know, go on a tour, hire a tour guide, find a local, Google? Like what's the best way to make sure that you're not just doing that? Hey, I'm making an X on my bucket list.
Well, that really, really depends on who you are and why you're traveling, right? Yeah. It's not something you can give a straight up answer. And I think all the options you gave are possible. I think what you need to understand is one of the two things. One is, what within that country got you interested in the first place, right? So many times people say, oh, I want to go to Vietnam. It's like, all right, why? Mm-hmm. What in Vietnam got you interested? And then if you understand that, you can focus on that, right? Mm-hmm. You can say, okay, actually what I really want to go to Vietnam, I saw this one beautiful photo of the rice fields in the north. Say, all right, so now you know where your trip is supposed to be. Don't go to Vietnam, go to the rice fields. Yeah. And then have, a couple of days to see Saigon and have a couple of days to see Hanoi. You'll be fine. The other thing is if you say, okay, I'm a busy man or a busy woman, and everything I need to do, I have to do it in 1 week, and I saw a really cool movie about Mongolia, and I want to see all of it. Then my reply would be, fine. Then find the best possible guide. Find somebody who knows Mongolia better than anybody else, and have them show you around. Have them choose for you where you want to go. That way, you'll get the better experience. If you're a traveling photographer, or if you just doing it for fun, my only advice would be fly with the understanding that you are going to come back if it's interesting, and fly with the understanding you're not going to see anything. You're going to see whatever comes your way and stick to it. And so many times I see people who travel and they have a checklist of all the countries they want to see. And if you're kind of drifting with the wind, so many times you drift exactly to where you want to go. And you end up spending, instead of 3 weeks across Vietnam, you end up spending 2 of those weeks in Sapa. Yeah, it was just like so much fun, and that's so many nice people. Yeah.
That's the magic, though, right there, Asher. I think because if you hit the nail right on the head. Because if you're going someplace that you've never been before, and that you very likely may not ever make it back to again, you want to cram as much as you can into that trip, which is what I'm hearing from you is probably opposite of what you should be doing. Like if it's Vietnam, as for an example, I really want to shoot the food scene, the street food scene in Hanoi or something like that, then that's what you're going to do. That's your target. But how do you reconcile that with, if I just go here with all this camera gear that I bought and only shoot street food, it's going to be kind of a waste. How do you reconcile that and balance it?
Well, I think you just learn from your own life experience. I mean, how many times you've been to a relationship with a person, and if you came to a relationship to build a relationship with somebody and your attitude is like, oh, eventually we're going to break up, there is no future, right?
Yeah.
Your attitude is, even if we do break up, eventually something else might happen, or we might go back together, or might this work forever? I don't know, but I'm willing to try and see how things go.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I teach it a lot when I do photography workshops, for example. And I think it's one of the hardest things for photographers to do is to be aware of why you're interested in something. For example, a lot of the time I see students of mine show me a portrait and go like, okay, why did you want to photograph this person? And it's really hard for them to give a very decisive answer. But once they start thinking about it, they realize they should have taken a completely different portrait, right? They see a person and say, oh, I just love his mustache. Like, okay, but his mustache is really small and undominant in the photo you showed me. So why didn't you focus? Same thing in traveling. If you said, I'm continuing on your example of the food scene in Hanoi, if what you're interested in is on the food scene in Hanoi, why the hell did you go to Saigon?
Yeah, yeah.
Why were you looking there?
Right.
And I think a lot of times it's a matter of investing your time and effort and money, which is a very big, important resource, on exactly what you wanted to see, right? For example, think about somebody who wants to see, Mongolia and is traveling and everything, and then he goes hiking. Well, you wanted to see the culture, didn't you? He's like, yeah. Why were you going hiking? It's this kind of problems. So I think to answer your question, the more you understand why you like something, why you're interested in somebody or something, the more you can invest in working on that relationship and that experience. So that's the same for relationships and traveling.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, we can talk forever on that because the things that pop up are, we started this whole interview with the whole gear acquisition syndrome and the infatuation with gear that a lot of photographers have. But then you overlay once in a lifetime travel on top of that, then it becomes, okay, I'm going to Mongolia. Okay, I'm going to bring these 2 camera bodies because what if one breaks? I need a backup. And then I'm going to bring all these lenses. I need a wide all the way through to telephoto. What if I see some wildlife? I need a really long lens. Hey, maybe drones are legal there. I'm going to bring a drone with me too, and pretty soon you got a mule with you to carry all your gear. What do you do? Like, do you go in minimal with, just Asher behind behind the lines of the country with a 50 millimeter f1.2 and that's it, or are you loaded down?
Do you really think I can afford a 50 millimeter 1.2? How dare you, sir? No.
Okay. All right, a 2.8 or a 5.6.
Just a duct tape with a magnifying glass. No. Well, before I answer, I'll say it's a bit an unfair example on me because I'm a big guy. I'm 190 centimeters tall. I'm almost 2 meters tall. I'm a big guy, so for me to carry this kind of stuff is not really much of a hassle.
Yeah.
I do go relatively minimal. I usually just carry one body, one camera body, and then like 2-3 lenses, usually a 50, 1.4. and a wide lens, because that's usually how close I get to the people I photograph. So I don't really have usage for anything else. And that's pretty much it, because over time, like again, if we talked about the steps, when I started traveling, I used to bring everything. I brought tripods and flash and LED lights and I don't know, an umbrella and a towel, everything. And as you travel again, you kind of notice that I've never used my tripod ever.
Yeah.
Why I keep carrying it? Okay, I never, for example, for myself, I never put a backpack on my back while traveling. I always had to drive a place or fly a place or ride a place.
Yeah.
So why do I carry a mochila backpack? It's so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Or I kept bringing, let's say, 2 camera bodies. I never used the second camera body. I never did. And if I did, it was just because my battery died. So just get another battery.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's a matter of experience. But I do think minimalism is really helpful when you do, especially document your travel photography, because you're already so in somebody's life, right? In his face, in his routines. You don't want to be this monstrosity of technology. You're like, coming to somebody's face and expecting him to be natural and relaxed. So it's your work, especially somebody like me, who's huge, right? And so, for example, my latest project was in Ethiopia, and I worked with this beautiful young girl called Torgo, and she was about, I think, 11. So somebody like me, who is, twice her size and height, coming with a big, bulky camera, trying to take a photo, you can't expect a little girl to be, oh that's nice. You have to build a relationship. So the more minimalist you can keep your gear and the more simple you can keep it, it's always better for work and also for traveling.
Yeah. Less is more. And like you were talking about with the whole being able to not be intrusive or be the ignorant tourist, showing up with $20,000 worth of camera gear to a village that the entire village may not make that much, right? And then here you come trying to take photos and leave with them, right? So
I love that. The village may not make $20,000.
Hey, I'm walking the line. You see where I'm located, right?
My Soviet genes are going like, you capitalist, how dare you?
Dude, you have to record my voicemail message with a Russian accent.
Welcome to Frederick's voice message.
Exactly. Like God, I'm off track now. But who is that YouTuber that blows stuff up? He's a Russian guy, and he has Russian in the name of his YouTube channel. But it's like, I'll look it up. I'll find it and I'll send it to you. But Asher, I want to rewind back and sort of do a prequel, right? So we talked about where kind of what you're doing now and your approach to photography and storytelling and the gear you take and all that. Let's go back to the beginning where you made the decision or somehow jumped on the road to photography. How did that happen? Where were you before you decided, hey, this photography storytelling thing is for me? Where were you before that, and how did you get into what you're doing now?
Ooh, that's a rough question. I'll try to give you the quick answer for it.
Sure.
So as a kid, we talked about my dad a bit. My dad was my hero. I mean, I grew up just adoring my dad's life and his history. And he was a professor of acting and miming. And I remember as a kid, we had this album next to the TV, just this red super Soviet album with like fur on it and like a place to put a picture in the front, like the most ridiculous thing you can imagine. And in that album was one of the last remaining souvenirs my dad had from Russia when he lived there, everything they had to leave behind. And that album was something that he brought back. And it was full of traveling photos he had, when he went to Siberia, when he found a baby white bear, for example. And he has a photo of him holding like a cub, a bear cub. And places that he went, just like these crazy adventures of him traveling using his art. And I remember as a kid, this was something I was fascinated by. And I thought, maybe when I grow up, I can do the same. Maybe I can get it too.
Yeah.
And when I grew up as a teenager, I was really into cinema. And my dad sent me to study cinematography a little bit, mostly just how to write scripts. That was like the obsession, to write stories, to write, if I were ever to do a movie, we'd do this, and then the ending would be like this, and to actually properly learn how to tell a story and everything. And then my dad told me, you're too fixated on theater thinking, right? You're thinking about a story as a stage. You have to start thinking about a story like a cinema, like a movie. So you should go and study photography. And then I went and I did a one photography course, and I was in love just because I could do my own stories. When you think about a movie production, you think about a producer, filmmaking, actors, money, script writing, editing. When you do photography, you take a camera and you go.
Yeah.
Nothing is stopping you. You don't owe anything to anybody. And I was in love with that. So I just started going on photography. And the more that got into my habit, I started having it a part of my life. I was a military photographer for 3 years in the Army. After that, I did some fashion shoots. I just wanted to keep photography as part of my career. And I think when I got to that age where I said, okay, right now I'm doing 1, 2, 3. Is that what I want to do in the next 40 years of my life? And at the time, I was doing mostly fashion and PR photography. And because I realized this was not for me. This is what not, the red album photos of my dad when I grew up. I wanted to get that. I was like, okay, the way to get that is traveling. Sold everything I had and started doing what I do today. And wow. I think it was kind of a natural thing for me to figure out a way how to mix photography, which was very important to me at the time. And, basically I was offered to it by my dad, which was very important for me to have. And to go to the same kind of routine which I started from, which was storytelling, my dad's story, my mom's story, the stories I grew up with as a kid. And I think this kind of marriage was very natural for me.
Yeah.
And that's why, for me, we talked about this in a pre-interview as well, I don't really like photography as much as I do storytelling. So when I go ahead and I take photos, I never think about, oh, that'll be a nice photo. I never take that shot. I always think, okay, what is the story I'm working on? Who is the main character? What will be the decisive event? Okay, I need to find a way to visualize that. Oh, nice. What will be a great photo for that? Okay, found it. Or when we start photo shooting, I'm like, well, this is interesting. This can be a character. Bam, and you go for it and you invest your time. So if we talked also before about spending your time accordingly, once I understand what's my story, everything else is dead. Everything else. Even if I see a really cool photo, a really cool experience, I'm like, this is not the story I'm working on. I have this much time. I only have 2 days to work on that. I only have 10 days. I only have 1 year. I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to invest every second, every moment, every click, every writing word, every interview that I can have just to promote and to build that story. Nothing else matters.
Now, are you building these stories, like when these stories come to life, is it solely through photography, or are you interweaving other media in there, like audio and video and written word?
Well, I try to do as much as I can. So I do a lot of interviews. I write every project. For example, on my website, if you check, I think we talked about this. Mm-hmm. I don't have a gallery. Like, I don't have, here's my portfolio. I only have my projects. So if you want to see my images, you have to see them in a context. So you can see the images and the texts that I write. So I write the actual stories.
Yeah. I
used to do vlogs. I used to do video behind the scenes for almost every project I did. Sadly, I had to stop for a little while. And my absolute favorite way is to do lectures. I mean, it sounds really funny, but because I do come from a family that has a lot of stage experience, both my parents are actors, my dad was a professor, so
it's in your blood.
For me, the most rewarding experience is to talk to a person like you and I are doing right now and show you the photos and then tell you the actual stories,
Yeah.
Because I've seen it. I've seen how much when you see a photo which is nice and pretty, you're like, oh, that's really cool. Oh, you shot it was, all right, cool. But when you build it up, when you tell the story behind that photo, or you take a series of photographs leading one to the next, and you're building an emotion for the person who's seeing it, you really see how people forget that it's a photograph, and they start thinking about themselves. And there's something about, let's call it pretty images, that make people sit down and listen. Right? So most of the stories you write, every story you ever write is always about human emotions and feelings. It's almost impossible to tell a story about something else.
Yeah.
About the way we see the world. That's what stories do. So if I tell you a story about loneliness, you'll be like, yeah, I know. Loneliness sucks. I don't want to be lonely. I get it. Yeah. But if I tell you a story about the Yinbao fishermen of South China, and I show you their arts and their lifestyle, and then I finish it up with the message of loneliness, of how those old fishermen are basically there alone, away from their families, and they probably will never see them again because of their lifestyle, suddenly it hits you. And I've seen it happen so many times. So for me, if you ask about storytelling, my favorite part about showing photography is literally showing photography.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that was the most rewarding experience I've ever had.
And so if you look at what you're doing, travel photography and storytelling that way, what in your head, I know this may be an unanswerable question, right? But what's the difference between street photography, photojournalism, and travel storytelling type photography? How do you draw the line between those?
Oh, very easy. Go around them and say it's all photography.
It's all photography.
It is. I mean, at the end of the day, whatever art. So I would say to try to divide different formats of photography based on whatever criteria, I think it's a wrong way of looking at it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, photography is an art. So the only line you're talking about is between different art forms, right? So you could agree that photography is not the same as dance, and it's not the same as music, right? They might have certain similarities to them, right? But I mean, for example, music may move certain people and photography may move others, or both photography and dance have a lot to do with colors or contrast of them. But photography as a whole is an art form. So it doesn't matter if you're doing street photography, it doesn't matter if you're doing studio photography, travel photography, or I don't know, macro photography. It's an art form. And as an artist or as a creator, what you always need to be obsessed about is not how do you make your skill necessarily better, but what are you trying to say? And if that's your focus, it doesn't matter what you do. It only matters how you make it happen.
Yeah, you begin with the end in mind, right? Versus, you know, let me go assemble a bunch of things and figure out how I can use them. You begin with the story that you're trying to tell, and then assemble the right tools and whatever to get that story out of your mind's eye. That's cool, man. So if people want to learn this stuff, is the best way to go about it just, you know, throw yourself into, you know, just go book a ticket and go somewhere, find a guide, like you were saying earlier, or should they take a workshop? You mentioned, you know, you did some courses or whatever. Are workshops the way to start, you know, for people to sort of start getting themselves out there with as little risk as possible?
I don't think so. I would say that the honest answer would be both, right? I wouldn't go do what I couldn't left everything and start doing photography projects or traveling if I didn't have the same experience and knowledge that I had before, right? So before doing this, I already had some sort of experience with photography. I've been 3 years a military photographer beforehand, right? So it's a lot of on the field work, harsh conditions, very tight schedules, very tricky people to work with a lot of times. And I had background in script writing, and I had background in acting, and I had background in teaching, right? So I used what I had to make this happen. But I think the correct answer to what you say would always be you have to do both, right? One is useless without the other. So if you keep going to workshops and studying photography and you never practice it, then what's the point? But if you keep practicing and you never learn from other perspectives, then what's the point? Right? It's the same way of keep photographing and keep it to yourself. You never show it, you never get criticism, you'll never grow. But I think what the answer to your question would be, it has to be 50-50, right? So, for example, if, let's say now we're in the beginning of the year, right? So New Year resolutions. So I would say, all right, let's do it this way. Let's say you want to invest X amount of money in your photography abilities, right? You want to improve in photography and you're going to invest in it this much money and time. My answer would be, fine, make sure it's split 50-50 between actually going out and doing it. You know, if you can, let's say it's $1,000, can you afford 2 weeks off work by spending those $1,000 on rent and food instead of working? Go ahead and photograph something, right? Can you spend this money on a flight? Do it. And workshops. And in terms of workshops, my attitude has always been, don't go to a workshop because you're interested in the topic of the workshop, right? I wouldn't go to study Photoshop because there's a Photoshop course opening up now next to where I live. I would go to study Photoshop from a person, from somebody that I know that I like his work.
Yeah.
Right. So I would love to study more of documentary and travel photography, but I wouldn't study it from the next person that I find. I want to study it from people I look up to. I mean, if I could go to Steve McCary's workshop, I'll be there tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right. And the people that influence my life are people that I chose to influence. It's very rare when you come to learning about something, you have to be able to choose who is going to teach you. Yeah. You have to be able to choose who you want to follow. And if you're an active part of it, then you always grow because you're always challenging yourself to see, or okay, this person is out of my reach right now. How do I get there? Right? That's how you really grow. Yeah. And it has to be a 50-50.
Love it. Love it. Love it. So much to talk about. So much to talk about, man. Let's wrap this up. And if you could give the This Week in Photo TWiP audience some advice right now. Someone's sitting in their car in traffic, you know, somewhere in the world, and they've got expensive camera gear, but they haven't even put 100 shots on it yet, and they're looking for something outside of the box to do. Should they spend extra money on, you know, a workshop? Should they go buy the lens? Should they get an online course? Should they buy more? Should they, you know, get Capture One, some new software? What should they do? What would be the next steps for them to start moving closer to being an accomplished photographer in 2019?
Well, I don't know what would be necessarily advice that will specifically talk to people who have a lot of gear and don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
But I can give the honest advice that I keep giving myself and I keep using myself whenever I work. And it's kind of this YOLO kind of advices. And I think you need to build for 2019, what you should do if that's your hope to actually do photography and become, as you said, accomplished photographer. What you need to do is adapt a formula that will help you make the right decision. My formula is very straightforward. There's always a series of decisions that are possible, right? Let's say I have a certain amount of money, what do I do with it? I have a certain amount of time, what do I do with it? I have a certain type of gear, what do I do with it? What I do is I write down or I list in my head, here's everything I can do with it. And then I say, what scares me the most? One of those choices is the absolute stupidest, reckless, weirdest, scariest option I can do. And that's the one I do.
Really?
Because things that scares us are the things that build us, right? So for me, for example, when I took the flight to Mongolia, I was terrified. I mean, I said it to you. I cried the first night I got there.
Yeah.
The reason I did this is because that was the scariest option I could. I could easily go to a nearby country. I could go to Europe. I could go to an organized tour. I could go to the States, you know, places that are safer. But because this what scares me the most, that's what I did. Right now, I'll give you the personal example of myself. 2 months ago, I went back to work. I had a bit of harsh gear. My dad passed away a year ago, so I had to deal with that, and it kind of threw me off everything I had. And when I got back to the idea of maybe going back to work, going back to do what I do, I had a certain amount of budget, and I was like, okay, I could go the safe plan and do this. I could go do this project, which is interesting. I can maybe buy a new camera. I can maybe invest this money in a new website. And then I stopped and I was like, well, there's 2 projects I want to do, but if I do them, I'm out of money. Like, that'll be the end for me. If I fail, I fail. That's scary. I'm going to do it.
Wow.
That should have been it. Now, I'm not saying it's like, you know, I'm so cool. Right. I'm just saying that's usually the right way to do it.
Wow.
That's usually the right way to grow. So even if you fail, even if it's a horrible decision and you waste all your money and time, you have done something that you would have never done otherwise. And the windows of opportunity, especially in documentary travel photography or any kind of art or any kind of thing in life, is so small and closes like this. Then if you realize that you have an opportunity to something that scares you and you might not be able to do it ever again, do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it.
Worst that can happen.
I love it. Man, that's the perfst way to end this interview, because it's almost like the Nike slogan, right? Just do it. Just do it.
Just do it.
Just do it. Where should people go if they want to check you? Obviously, I'm going to link to your website and everything from the blog post in this video, etc. But where should people go if they want to keep up with you or, you know, otherwise interact with you online?
Well, right now I'm in Mongolia if they want to come over. Social media-wise, I do have a newsletter, which seems to be the most constant way of talking to people, because social medias keep changing and blocking people from publicizing the work or whatever. I do have an Instagram, which I publish regularly on. And if you do find me on Facebook, don't go to the page, go to my personal account. I'll more than happy to be friends with you. I just, you know, the business pages are horrible there. So Instagram, Facebook, I have a newsletter we can check on my website. If you subscribe to the newsletter, you also get a free ebook, which is a really weird bribe to subscribe, but I wrote like 7 tips for travel photography and photography projects.
Perfect.
So a lot of the stuff we talked about is over there. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And you're more than welcome to grab coffee with me wherever I go.
Absolutely.
Whenever I travel, I have free time, I'm like, who wants coffee or bacon strips somewhere?
But no bacon strips.
I know what's up. I know what's up.
Are there any workshops in your future? I mean, if you're traveling around the world and you've been to all these places and you're intimate, you are now a de facto guide, right? So why not start leading workshops? Have you considered that?
Well, I do. I do photography trips and photography workshops in different places around the world. it varies from year to year because I don't know, I found it much preferable to work by myself or with companies who do what I do. Because the second you marry to a company, they kind of dictate how you're going to do your workshop, how you're going to do your trips.
Absolutely.
And I found it, like, for example, I do trips in Mongolia a lot. And I found that the only companies I enjoyed working with were companies who were like, do whatever trip you want to do, we'll get you the people. So I like that. And so the workshops I do are usually kind of random. So if you do follow me on social media or newsletter, I'll update on that. I do have a workshop in Vietnam this March. I'm supposed to do Papua New Guinea at the end of the year. I'm working on northern India, which is basically ancient Tibet, around September. But all these are kind of my organization. So if you just join the newsletter or something, you'll definitely get information on that. And if anybody's listening and he wants to do a workshop in your hometown, give me a call. I'd love to make it happen.
Awesome. You know? Awesome. Asher, thank you, man. This has been then. You got to come on more. You got to come on more. You got to.
I would love to.
I will send you an invite and I'll have you on as often as you are able to, between taking pictures and all that stuff,
We've been not doing anything. No, I will say this. Thank you so much for the opportunity, man. I've seen your podcast a couple of times, and there was this girl who you interviewed. I forgot the name. Maybe I'm going to butcher her name a little bit. Rhino Robin, something like this.
Oh, she goes by Rhino Robin. Rhino, yeah.
And she's a really good friend, Renee, and she's awesome. And I remember seeing her being interviewed on your show, and I was like, wow, that's so cool. Just to actually have a real conversation on photography. Not, because most podcasts or interviews that I've seen so far about photography are very obsessed on, what lens do you shoot? Tell us about this photo. And I think these conversations on actually how photography is done, how traveling is done, how storytelling is done, are extremely important for anybody who wants to go into photography or anybody who is into photography and want to grow. So thank you for doing this cool channel, and I'd love to be a part of it again.
Thank you, man. That means a lot to me. Thank you. I appreciate that. And you hit it right on the head. Increasingly so over the last, 3 years or so, my tolerance for the gear discussion has been going lower and lower, and these kinds of discussions, whether they be about, tips on how to get started or even, things that surround issues that are facing photographers like censorship or whatever like that, those kinds of things I think are much more valuable to many more people than just the latest and greatest lens or the latest and greatest camera body or the latest drone or something. So although we want to talk about those things, I just don't want to obsess about those things,
Well, let's just be brutally honest. Most people can't afford them, which is absolutely fine. And I think because a lot of the time people think, especially in the beginning, because I can't afford it, I have no chance. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been using the same camera for almost 8 years. And I never had any problem with magazines. With magazines or books that bought my photos saying, wow, the resolution is not as high as the latest camera. Nobody cared, ever.
Right. Those are words to live by right there. Perfect. All right, Asher.
Nobody cares. That's words to live by, indeed. Nobody cares.
No one cares. No, there's two things. No one cares. Just do it. And if make a list of things that scare you the most and do the thing that scares you the most. That's the Asher mantra.
I think it's the Russianest podcast you've ever had, doesn't it? It scares you. You do, huh?
You do it. When we meet, you are doing my voicemail. That's all there is to it.
Sure.
All right, Asher. Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, man.
All right.
Have a great day.
You too. Take care. This is TWiP.